Son handed me the keys on a Tuesday, not just any Tuesday, my 63rd birthday. I remember standing in the driveway of my house in Riverside, California, holding a set of car keys I didn't recognize. A small blue ribbon tied around the keychain. My son was grinning the way he used to grin when he was 9 years old and had just done something he was proud of. "It's a lease," he said. "Brand new F-150, fully loaded. I put it in your name, Dad. You've been driving that old Silverado for 12 years. I looked out toward the street. Sure enough, there was a silver truck parked at the curb. Clean, shiny, not a scratch on it. I didn't know what to say. My son had never given me anything like this. He was never the type. Growing up, he'd forget my birthday half the time. I used to joke about it with my wife, God rest her soul. She'd say, "That boy has your stubbornness and none of my sentimentality." She passed 3 years ago. Lung cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to the end. After that, it was just me and the house in Riverside and the old Silverado and whatever was left of the life we'd built together. My son lived about 40 minutes away in Chino Hills. Nice neighborhood. He worked in commercial real estate, or so he said. I never fully understood what he did. He drove a leased BMW, wore good watches, and always seemed to have money without ever explaining exactly where it came from. After his mother died, he started coming around more often. I thought it was grief. I thought he was finally becoming the son I'd hoped he'd be. I was wrong. But I didn't know that yet, not on my birthday, standing in the driveway holding those keys. I thanked him. I hugged him. We went inside, and he'd ordered a cake from the bakery his mother used to love, and we sat at the kitchen table, and I felt something I haven't felt in a long time. I felt taken care of. The next morning, I drove the new truck to my daughter's house in Temecula. My daughter is the one I should tell you about first because she's the reason I'm still standing. Her name is Patricia. She goes by Pat. She's 41, works as a paralegal at a firm in Marietta, and she has her mother's eyes and her mother's way of looking at you like she already knows what you're about to say before you say it. Her husband, Greg, is a good man. Quiet, works in logistics. They have 2 kids, my grandchildren, and a house that always smells like something is baking. When I pulled up in the new truck, Pat came out to the driveway before I even turned off the engine. She looked at the truck, then she looked at me. Where did that come from? I told her about my birthday, about her brother, about the ribbon on the keychain. She didn't smile. "Dad," she said, "come inside." We sat at her kitchen table, the same way I'd sat at mine the night before, except this time nobody was celebrating anything. Greg took the kids to the backyard. Pat poured 2 coffees and set them down and folded her hands the way she does when she's choosing her words carefully. "Did he ask you to sign anything?" she said. I thought about it. He had, actually. A few weeks earlier, he'd brought over some paperwork, said it was about the truck lease, about putting it in my name, about making sure I was covered on insurance. I'd signed a few pages without reading them closely. The print was small and my reading glasses were in the other room, and he was talking while I was signing, and I just trusted him. Pat's face didn't move. "What kind of paperwork?" she said. I told her what I remembered. It was a lot of pages. He'd had them in a manila folder. He'd pointed to each signature line, and I'd signed. She asked if I still had a copy. I didn't. He'd taken everything with him. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I'm going to make a phone call." She called one of the attorneys at her firm. His name is Walter, and I know him from firm events over the years. A careful man, the kind who speaks slowly because he's thinking while he talks. She put him on speaker and I described what I'd signed, as best I could remember. When I finished, Walter was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Tell me exactly what you remember about the nature of those documents." I said they seemed to be about financial matters, some kind of account authorization. My son had mentioned something about consolidating my accounts so that bills could be paid automatically while I was traveling. I'd been talking about a road trip that summer. He said it would make things easier. Walter asked me which bank I used. I told him, First Federal, same branch in Riverside for 22 years. He said, "I want you to call them first thing tomorrow morning. and ask for a full account activity report for the last 90 days. Every transaction, every authorization, everything. I asked him why. He said, because what you're describing sounds like a durable power of attorney combined with an account access authorization. If I'm right about what he had you sign, he can move money in and out of your accounts without any further approval from you. I drove home that night in the new truck, and I sat in my driveway for a long time before going inside. The house felt different, not different the way it had felt after my wife passed, when it was quiet in a heavy way. Different the way a room feels when you realize someone has been through your things. I called the bank first thing in the morning. The woman on the phone was patient. She pulled up my account. She read me the transaction history for the past 90 days. There were 17 withdrawals I didn't recognize, not small ones. The smallest was $2,400. The largest was $11,000. There were transfers to an account I'd never seen before. There were automatic payments set up for credit cards I didn't own. The total, across all of it, came to just over $61,000. I asked her to read it again. She did. $61,000. Gone. I sat down on the kitchen floor. I don't remember deciding to sit down. I just found myself there, back against the cabinet, phone in my hand, 63 years old, and completely hollowed out. I called Pat. She was at my house within the hour. She brought Walter. He sat across from me at the kitchen table and he opened a legal pad and he said, very calmly, "Tell me everything, from the beginning. Leave nothing out." So I did. I told him about the past year, about how my son had started coming around after his mother died, how he'd offered to help me manage my finances because he said I seemed overwhelmed, how I'd given him my online banking login, just temporarily, he said, just so he could help set up automatic bill pay, how he'd borrowed $8,000 8 months ago, said it was for a deal that was about to close, said he'd pay it back in 30 days, how it had never come back, how I'd asked about it twice and both times he'd said the closing was delayed and not to worry. Walter wrote all of it down. Then he asked me the question I hadn't let myself ask. Do you believe your son knew exactly what he was doing? I looked at my hands. My wife used to say I had working man's hands. I spent 31 years in commercial HVAC. I installed systems in hospitals, office buildings, schools. I knew how things were supposed to fit together and what it looked like when they didn't. Yes, I said. I believe he did. Walter contacted a forensic accountant he worked with. Her name was Dr. Palm Okafor, and she spent the next week going through everything: bank records, the documents my son had given me to sign, the lease agreement for the truck. When she came back to Pat's house to walk us through what she found, she set a stack of papers on the dining room table and said simply, "This was deliberate." The documents I'd signed weren't just an account authorization. They included a financial power of attorney, a secondary beneficiary change on my life insurance policy, and a signature page for a home equity line of credit application, my house used as collateral. The HELOC application had already been processed. The credit line was open. My son's name was on the account as an authorized user. Dr. Okafor estimated that if we hadn't caught it when we did, within another 60 to 90 days he would have been able to draw against my home equity, and depending on the market, that could have been another $180,000 to $220,000. He wasn't just stealing from my bank account. He was working toward the house. Pat sat very still through all of this. When Dr. Okafor finished, my daughter looked at me and said, "Dad, I need you to know something. I suspected something was wrong 6 months ago. I tried to say it gently and you shut me down. I'm not saying that to make you feel bad. I'm saying it because from now on, when I tell you something, I need you to hear me." She was right. I had shut her down. My son had told me Pat was jealous of their relationship, that she'd always resented how close we'd become after their mother died. I believed him. I had to sit with that for a while. Walter filed a police report the next morning. A detective from the Riverside County Sheriff's Department came to the house, a woman named Detective Caldwell, thorough and unhurried. The kind of person who makes you feel like the facts are enough, and the truth will take care of itself if you just give it all to her. I gave her everything: the bank records, Dr. Okafor's report, the documents I'd signed. The text messages where my son had asked for money. She said the investigation would take time. She said not to contact my son. That was the hardest part. Not because I wanted to confront him, because every time my phone showed his name in my contacts, I had to decide not to call and ask him why. Why after everything? Why, until he knew what losing his mother had done to me? Why, when I had never, not once in his life, turned him away when he needed something? 37 days after Detective Caldwell left my house, my son was arrested. He was at a title company in Ontario, California. He was sitting across from a notary in the process of completing the paperwork to refinance my home. With himself as the new borrower, with my forged signature on the transfer documents, Detective Caldwell later told me they'd been watching him for 3 weeks, waiting for the moment that would give them the clearest possible case. They let him get all the way to the signing table. He was halfway through the second document when 2 detectives walked in. I wasn't there. Pat called me afterward. Her voice was steady, the way her mother's voice used to get steady, in moments when steadiness was the hardest thing. She said, "They have him, Dad." I sat in the living room of my house, the house my wife and I bought 30 years ago, the house my son had tried to take, and I cried. Not because of him, not out of grief for what he'd done, or anger at what he'd tried to do. I cried because of my wife, because she would have known. She always knew about both of them. She used to say Pat was her heart and her son was her worry. I'd thought that was just a mother's way of talking. I understand it differently now. His attorney tried to argue that the power of attorney had been granted voluntarily and that my son had simply been managing my finances on my behalf. The forensic accountant dismantled that in about 40 minutes on the stand. Dr. Suntel, Okafor is the kind of witness who doesn't raise her voice and doesn't back down. And watching her lay out the numbers, transaction by transaction, date by date, I understood why Walter had brought her in from the beginning. The judge didn't let the argument stand long. My son was convicted on 3 counts: elder financial abuse, forgery, and fraud. He was sentenced to 4 years in state prison and ordered to make full restitution, $61,400 in bank withdrawals, plus legal fees, plus penalties. The truck went back. I kept the Silverado. I know what some of you are thinking, because people have said it to me directly. How did you not see it coming? How do you not notice $61,000 leaving your account? Here's the honest answer. I was grieving. I'm not using that as an excuse. I'm using it as a fact. When my wife died, I stopped paying close attention to the things she used to manage alongside me. I let the mail pile up. I stopped checking statements. I told myself I'd deal with the finances when I felt more like myself. I kept waiting to feel more like myself, and someone who knew me, who knew exactly how I'd changed after losing her, decided to use that window. That's what elder financial abuse actually looks like. It doesn't look like a stranger calling about your social security number. It looks like someone who already has your trust, who knows which questions you won't ask, who times everything carefully for when you're the most alone. I changed everything after that. New accounts, new passwords, new bank branch. I added Pat to my accounts as a co-signer, not out of necessity but because she'd earned it. Walter helped me set up a simple financial review. Once a month, Pat and I look at everything together over coffee. It takes 45 minutes. It has given me back more peace than I expected. There's something else I want to say. For anyone out there listening who recognizes something in this story, the hardest part was not the money. The money was painful, and the process of getting justice was exhausting, and the legal system moved slowly, and it cost me more than the dollars. The hardest part was grieving my son while he was still alive. Grieving the version of him I thought I knew. Grieving the birthday dinner and the cake from the bakery his mother used to love, and the moment in the driveway when I felt taken care of for the first time in 3 years. That feeling was real, even if everything behind it was a lie. I'm 63 years old. I live in the same house in Riverside. My daughter comes over on Sundays with Greg and the grandkids, and sometimes when it's warm enough we sit on the back porch and I watch my grandchildren run around the yard, and I think about what it cost me to be standing there, watching them. It cost me more than I wanted to pay, but I'm still standing. and my daughter is here, and the house is still mine. I've had a lot of time to think about what actually happened, not just the fraud, not just the legal process, not just the money, but the sequence of it. The way one thing led to another, the way choices compound over time until they become something nobody can walk back from. My son didn't wake up one morning and decide to become someone who steals from his father. I don't believe that's how it works. I think it started smaller. A loan that didn't get repaid. A boundary I didn't hold. A moment where I looked the other way because I didn't want the confrontation. And each time I let something slide, I was teaching him that I would. I was telling him, without words, that there were no consequences here. That this was safe ground for whatever he needed to do next. That's not me excusing what he did. What he did was deliberate and calculated, and it caused real damage. But I understand my part in the conditions that made it possible. That's not guilt. That's honesty. Patricia tried to warn me. Not once, more than once, and I shut her down because my son had gotten into my ear, told me she was jealous, told me she'd always resented how close we'd become after their mother passed. I chose to believe the person who was lying to me over the person who was telling me the truth. I've had to sit with that. I still sit with it. Here's what I know now that I didn't know then. Trust is not the same as loyalty, and love is not the same as good judgment. I loved my son. I trusted him because I loved him. But love without clear eyes is just vulnerability with a nicer name. Patricia loved me too, and she used that love to pay attention, to ask hard questions, to stay in the room when the conversation got uncomfortable. That's the difference between the two of them, and it had nothing to do with who I spent more time with after their mother died. Walter told me once, during the legal process, that elder financial abuse is almost always perpetrated by someone the victim trusts completely. He said the trust is not a weakness. It's what makes us human. But he said the people who exploit that trust are counting on us to feel ashamed about being deceived, because shame keeps us quiet. And quiet is what they need. I wasn't quiet. That matters more than I can say. Not because speaking up got me justice, though it did, but because staying silent would have meant living in that house, in that life, with the knowledge of what had happened, and having done nothing about it. I couldn't do that to myself. I couldn't do that to my wife's memory. My son is serving his sentence. I don't know what he thinks about in there. I don't know if he understands what he took from me, or if he's only angry at getting caught. That part is outside of what I can control, and I've had to make peace with that. What I can control is how I move forward. I check my accounts every month with Patricia. I don't sign anything I haven't read. I ask questions now even when I feel like I should already know the answer. These are not complicated things, but they require a kind of attention I'd let go of while I was grieving, and getting that attention back has been its own kind of healing. The house is still mine. That's not a small thing.